Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I want to talk about the Bolshevik Revolution and the massacre of the Romanovs, the murder of the Romanov family during the night of July the 16th into July the 17th. This was in 1918, ought to be remembered by us. Whether we like it or not, one good adage for us to remember is that a civilization always reveals what it truly worships. And it reveals that through the blood that it is willing to shed. Now, listen to me carefully. A civilization reveals what it truly worships, and it reveals it by the blood it is willing to shed. Now, what do I mean by that? A civilization that worships God in the person of Jesus Christ will willingly shed the blood of Christ upon the altars of the churches across the world for the salvation of souls. And that blood that was shed once for all will be claimed again and again by a Christian civilization so that the nation, society, but ultimately souls can be purified and saved unto God. When you take Christ out of the public sphere, something or someone else must sit on the throne of our worship. The Bolshevik Revolution reveals what happens when we worship man. The execution of Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra with their 5 children was a declaration to the entire world that the Bolshevik Revolution was going to do more than transfer political authority. It was going to, by bloodshed, destroy the entire moral and political order grounded in Christianity and natural law. Now, if we're going to be honest about history, we can acknowledge that the Romanov dynasty had a few political failures. We can acknowledge that Nicholas II was not the most masterful political leader. The imperial system often resisted some needs of reform. But nevertheless, if we want to be people of integrity about history, then we must also recognize that the Romanovs transformed Russia during more than 3 centuries of rule through achievements that permanently altered the nation for the good. Peter the Great deliberately modernized the military and the bureaucracy. He also founded St. Petersburg as a gateway toward Europe, the rest of Europe. Catherine the Great cultivated education and literature in Russia, while also encouraging intellectual development throughout the empire. Alexander II abolished serfdom in 1861. This was one of the most important and significant social reforms, not just in Russia, but in European history. And meanwhile, successive Romanov rulers expanded Russia into a global power, stretching across Eurasia, while developing commerce, strengthening institutions, bilateral relations that allowed for national development and international cooperation, despite, might I add, immense geographic challenges. Orlando Figes observes that Imperial Russia experienced remarkable modernization during the late 19th century, despite persistent structural weaknesses that remained unresolved before the revolutionary period. Now, these historical facts are honesty. The problem is, in modernity, when we look back, it's easy to superimpose ideological mythology. And that's because history can sometimes be inconvenient. No, every civilization that experienced a revolution had some kind of virtue that we can acknowledge. And in this case, this was a massacre of the Christian foundings of this nation. Now, I also want to point out, I am not defending an absolute monarchy. I'm also not being a political romantic. I believe that the constitutional republic inherited by us in the founding of the United States of America represents a far healthier development within the long stream of biblical law, natural law, classical philosophy, English constitutionalism, and the Christian intellectual heritage. I believe that federalism wisely restrains centralized authority through distributed governmental responsibility. I believe our constitutional limitations wisely recognize humanity's fallen condition, and therefore we have multiple institutional checks and balances upon ambition. In fact, James Madison understood this in Federalist 51. He wrote that government exists because men lack angelic perfection. Lord Acton would later summarize centuries of political wisdom through that famous observation that we all know about. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so political revolutions require extraordinary caution because political destruction usually advances much faster than institutional reconstruction. Theodore Roosevelt actually wisely recognized this. And he recognized this as a permanent truth. He warned, healthy growth cannot normally come through revolution. A revolution is sometimes necessary, but if revolutions become habitual, the country in which they take place is going downhill. Roosevelt understood civilizations grow organically through virtue and law reform because stable societies cultivate moral habits across generations. The problem with revolutionary movements is they usually cultivate resentment across generations. And when done poorly, as we've seen throughout history, all that results is bloodshed and the subjugation of the masses. The Bolshevik Revolution proved this. It revealed its moral character long before Stalin assumed power. Lenin supplied the revolution with its governing philosophy. Lenin rejected Christianity through explicit ideological conviction. Marxist materialism was what drove him, and it regarded religion as an obstacle towards revolutionary consciousness. Marx had described religion as the opium of the people, or the opium of the masses. And Lenin expanded that in hostility, no less. He declared that, to quote him, every religious idea and every idea of God is unutterable vileness. And that language exposes far more than personal disbelief. It actually reveals absolute contempt towards God and therefore towards the foundation of human dignity. Christianity teaches every person possesses inherent worth through creation because they bear the image of God. That's Genesis 1:27. Lenin's philosophy completely ignores the bearing of the divine image. Your worth is your economic class, period. Human beings, according to that kind of a model of government, become useful only insofar as they advance revolutionary objectives. And if you don't, well, then you are massacred and eradicated. One class identity replaces divine identity. And the moment that happens, there is no more moral restraint. That's what's happened to Russia. And frankly, what might happen to all of us if we're not careful. Alexander Solzhenitsyn summarized that terrible transformation. He had penetrating precision when he wrote in his Templeton address, "Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened." And so the massacre of the Romanovs is more than a political execution. It symbolizes the deliberate ritual destruction of Christian civilization within Russia. The murderers even attempted to erase memory through spewing acid and fire and even hiding the graves, because their revolutionary ideology wanted dominion over history and memory itself. George Orwell would later capture that instinct through a chilling observation in his book 1984. He wrote, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Stalin inherited a real system of government from Lenin's vision, and Stalin faithfully expanded the foundations that were already established through Lenin. The secret police already existed, political terror, concentration camps, suppression of religious liberty, all of these things already, state confiscation, we can't forget that, class warfare, all of these things already existed. And so millions under communism entered prisons through the Gulag system, starved through collectivization, suffered execution through engineered terror. Churches closed, clergy entered prison, sacred art disappeared, families endured relentless surveillance, and I could go on and on. The economic consequences that followed were also, tragic to say the least. Friedrich Hayek demonstrated that centralized planning inevitably fails because dispersed human knowledge is inaccessible to bureaucratic command. And Russia entered the 20th century with rapidly expanding industrial production. Even though it had severe political difficulties, Soviet central planning produced chronic shortages because it was bureaucratically inefficient. Agricultural collectivization devastated food production. There was no innovation. It stagnated. Consumer goods were scarce. Corruption flourished. Ordinary citizens starved or were killed and died, sometimes waiting endlessly for basic necessities. And liberty suffered. Recently, someone I know tried to insist that during a conversation that socialism works beautifully, and the only problem we have is that true socialism has never actually been tried. Crack a history book. If we know our history, we know this. Soviet Russia attempted socialism, true socialism. Maoist China, Cambodia under Pol Pot and his killing fields, Cuba, North Korea, East Germany, Ethiopia under Mengistu, Venezuela. Every one of these experiments has produced not only severe economic decline and political repression, but widespread bloodshed. Stefan Kortes estimated that the communist regimes collectively caused approximately 100 million deaths in recent history through execution, together with famine and together with forced labor. This is in the book called The Black Book of Communism. Feel free to look it up. But defenders will continually promise that the next experiment will somehow escape every previous catastrophe because, everyone else got it wrong, but they will get socialism right. No, this is the lesson that you and I can learn from the blood of the Romanovs. I'm not trying to canonize them. What I am trying to say is, if we don't become a people who are grateful for our history, we will be doomed to repeat the very same revolutionary mistakes of the Bolshevik Revolution. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.